My brother walked out of the Nordenskjold brush on October 24th, 1977, 9 miles from where the search had given up on him 3 days before. He was frostbitten on 2 fingers of his right hand. He had no food, no sleeping bag, and no shelter gear. The temperature at the Carmax weather station had recorded -29 on the second night he was missing. The RCMP had closed the file on the 21st, presumption of exposure death, and our mother had stood in the doorway of the search coordinator's office and told Sergeant Aldous Pike, in plain and quiet words, that he was wrong. He was polite about it. He was not right. I have carried what I believe happened out there on that plateau for 47 years. I am 74 years old, and my heart is doing things a heart should not do. And I have decided I am not taking this to the ground with me. I want to be honest with you about one thing before I start. I am not a man who tells stories. I flew bushmail out of Whitehorse for 33 years, single-engine work on the remote community routes, and the bush teaches you early that a man who adds to what he saw is a man who cannot be trusted with the route. I am going to tell you what I know, what the evidence showed and what I believe happened, and I will tell you plainly when I am moving from one category to the other. The impossible part is this. Something alive and deliberate on that plateau kept my brother from dying for 3 nights at temperatures that should have killed him in the first 6 hours. Something arranged spruce boughs, something left food, something lay down beside him in the dark and was warm enough to matter. I do not know what it was. Everett never told me in full. What I have is the evidence he walked out carrying in his body and his silence, and one broken sentence he gave me in 1989, 12 years after, that I have been turning over ever since. To understand what that sentence meant, you need to understand who Everett was and what the country was, and you need to understand what the search actually found before it stopped looking. My brother was 22 in October of 1977. I was 27. He had come up to the Yukon the spring before, following me the way younger brothers do when they are not sure yet what they are made of and want to find out somewhere large enough to matter. He had taken work as an apprentice trail cutter with the Territorial Highways crew out of Carmax, marking alignment stakes for a secondary road project on the Nordenskjold Plateau. The plateau sits above 900 metres on the east side of the valley, open ground with spruce pockets and muskeg drainages. And in October, it is not a forgiving place. He knew that. He had grown up in the same country I had outside of Treeline, and he was not ignorant of cold weather. He was, if I am being honest, a little too confident. He ran light on gear. He had told his crew foreman, a man named Desjardins, that he could mark the day's stakes and be back at the truck before the weather turned. The weather turned at approximately 2 in the afternoon on October 11th. A ground blizzard came off the plateau flats without much warning, the kind that does not drop a great deal of snow but moves what is already there horizontally at 30 or 40 miles per hour and reduces visibility to the length of your arm. Everett was working about 4 miles from the crew truck when it hit. He missed the trail back. When Desjardins drove the route at 4:30 and found no sign of him, he reported it to the RCMP detachment in Carmax, and the formal search began on the morning of October 12th. I was flying the Pelly River mail run when my mother reached me by radio relay. I landed at Carmax that evening. I remember the sky had gone hard and colourless, the way Yukon sky does when it has made up its mind, and the plateau above the valley was buried in drift cloud. The search coordinator had 12 volunteers, 1 fixed-wing pass scheduled for the following morning if visibility allowed, and the RCMP's standard 7-day search protocol. I knew what that meant. I had been flying that country long enough to know what the search protocol meant when you did not find someone warm in the first 24 hours. Our mother, Ruth Jordan, drove up from Teslin the same evening I landed. She was 53 years old and had the kind of practical composure that some people mistake for coldness. She was not cold. She looked at the search map pinned to the wall of the coordinator's room, and she pointed to a spruce drainage on the northeast edge of the plateau, and she said she thought that was where he would have gone for wind shelter. The coordinator noted it. They searched it on day 3 and found nothing. On October 21st, Sergeant Pike closed the file. He was respectful about it. He told my mother that 7 days in that exposure at those temperatures left no realistic hope and that the body might not surface until spring thaw. He used the word closure, and I watched my mother's face while he said it. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "I'll close it when I see him." She drove back to Teslin. She set a place for Everett at the kitchen table that night, and as far as I know, she never stopped setting it until the day she could not anymore. 3 days after the file closed, Everett walked out of the brush at the northeast edge of the plateau, approximately 9 miles from where Desjardins had last seen him go into the storm. He was walking steadily. His outer jacket was intact, his boots were on his feet, his compass was still around his neck. 2 fingers of his right hand were frostbitten, the middle and ring finger, and he had some rawness on his cheeks. That was the total of his injuries. A road maintenance crew from the Carmack's depot spotted him from their truck on the Nordensky Old Access Road and called it in. He ate 2 sandwiches and a thermos of coffee before anyone thought to examine him. I was back on the Pelly route when the relay came through. I turned around and landed at Carmack's before he had finished his second cup. I have told this story twice. Once to my wife, Margaret, who listened without saying anything, and then held my hand across the kitchen table for a long time. Once to you. Now here is the part where I need to be careful about the line between what I know and what I believe. What I know starts with the temperature record. -29 Celsius on the night of October 13th, as logged at the Carmack station. That station sits in the valley at about 500 meters. The plateau is higher and more exposed. The actual overnight low up where Everett was is harder to say, but it was not warmer, it was very likely colder. A person without shelter in that temperature, without a sleeping bag or a bivvy or even a fire, will develop fatal hypothermia in under 4 hours, depending on body mass and how much they are moving. Everett was not a large man. He weighed maybe 155 pounds. He had a flannel shirt under his work jacket, wool pants, and rubber-soled work boots. He was not carrying a survival kit. He had a lighter and a jackknife and a compass, and about a quarter-pound of jerky he had brought for lunch. He was out there for 78 hours. I spent the first few days after he walked out convincing myself that there was an ordinary explanation. This is what I do. 33 years of flying bush routes will make you a methodical person, because the country will kill you very efficiently if you allow yourself to believe things that are not supported by the instruments. My first explanation was that he had found a hollow in the ground or a cut bank with enough windbreak to shelter him, and that the exertion of walking had kept his core temperature from dropping. I held that explanation for about a week. Then I thought it through more carefully. A cut bank might shelter a man from wind, but it does not generate heat. At -29, with no insulation between your body and the ground will pull the heat out of you faster than you can produce it. Even with the wind cut, you need something between you and the cold. He did not have it. I let that explanation go. My second explanation was that he had found an abandoned line cabin, or trapper's cache. There was one on the north end of the plateau, a territorial trapping cabin that had been registered in the 1950s and was still standing as of a 1974 survey. I checked the survey. The cabin was 11 miles northeast of where Everett had been working, and the search had covered that ground on day 4 with no sign of occupancy or recent fire. I flew over it myself the following spring. The door was frozen shut from the outside, with a solid drift built against the sill. Nobody had been in that cabin in years. I let that explanation go too. My third explanation, and I am a little embarrassed to have held it as long as I did, was that Everett had built a snow shelter. A properly constructed snow trench or quinsy can hold a person through a severe Yukon night. The problem was that Everett had the jackknife and nothing larger to cut or dig with, and the ground on the plateau in mid-October is not deep snow territory. It is wind-scoured with maybe 8 to 12 inches of hardpack. You cannot build a quinsy in 8 inches of hardpack with a jackknife. I let that explanation go in December of 1977, sitting at my kitchen table in Whitehorse with a glass of rye whiskey and the plateau topographic map spread out under the lamp. I had nothing left to put in the space where an explanation should be. What I had instead was a set of physical facts that Everett himself had given me, without intending to, over the first several hours after he walked out. He was not hypothermic when the maintenance crew found him. His core temperature taken at the Carmack's nursing station was 36.8 Celsius. That is within normal range. He had been ambulatory for what he estimated was 2 hours before he hit the road, which is consistent with 9 miles of plateau travel in good-going conditions. His boots were wet, but not frozen on his feet. 2 fingers frostbitten, the rest of his hands functional. He had eaten the jerky on the first day, he said, and had eaten nothing after that. That last part bothered me more than anything else for a long time. A man who has eaten nothing for 60-odd hours and who has been exposed to extended severe cold will not walk 9 miles with a near-normal body temperature. He will be severely glycogen-depleted, cognitively impaired, possibly hypothermic, and physically unable to sustain that pace. Everett was none of those things. He was thin and tired, and his fingers hurt, but he was coherent. He remembered the days in sequence. He could tell you the date. When I asked him what he had eaten after the jerky ran out, he was quiet for a moment, the way he was quiet about many things in those first days, and he said there had been something. Dried meat of some kind, he thought, and berries, dark ones he didn't recognize. He said he hadn't asked where they came from. I didn't push him then. He was 22 years old, and he was alive, and I was not ready to press him on things he wasn't ready to say. Ruger came into the account about 3 weeks after Everett walked out. Ruger was my dog, a black and tan mixed hound I had picked up from a trapper near Pelly Crossing in 1974. He was a steady animal, the kind of dog that does not spend energy on false alarms. I had driven him out to the plateau to check a trapline I had run on the northeast drainage, the same drainage my mother had pointed to on the search map, and when we came to the edge of the spruce stand at the bottom of the slope, Ruger stopped walking. He stood with his nose up and his tail out, and he was perfectly still. Not afraid. Not the bristled attention you see when a dog smells predator. The attention was different, attentive and calm, like a dog who has just recognized a scent he has filed as safe. He stood there for perhaps a full minute, pointed at the tree line and then turned and looked at me, and then looked back at the trees. I stood with him and looked at the tree line, and I did not see anything. But the hair on my arms was up under my coat, and I am not a man who ignores that. I filed it. It was Ruger's reaction that made me go back and look at the ground near the drainage more carefully when the snow had settled and the light was right. What I found in a sheltered drawer about 40 meters into the spruce was the remains of a bed. It was not an animal bed in the ordinary sense. It was an arrangement of spruce boughs, broken off rather than cut, laid in a rough oval about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, layered to a depth of maybe 8 to 10 inches. Spruce bough beds are not unknown in a wilderness survival context. A man who knows what he is doing can construct one to insulate himself from the ground. Everett knew that, in the abstract. The problem was the size and the arrangement. The oval was too large for one person, and the boughs on one side were layered differently, heavier and more densely packed, as though a second object had lain on them and compressed them. The compression pattern on that second side was not human-sized. I measured what I could measure with the tools I had. I am not going to give you a number I cannot verify to the inch. I will tell you it was large, and that I stood in that drawer for a long time looking at it before I went back to the truck. I found the 2 sets of tracks, or what was left of them, about 20 meters north of the bed. They were wind-damaged by then. 3 weeks of exposure, mostly rounded depressions rather than defined prints. One set was clearly human, the lug pattern of a rubber-soled work boot, size 9 or 10. The second set was not human. I knelt beside one depression and measured it against my hand with my fingers spread. I did it twice because I didn't believe the first measurement. I am a man with large hands. That is all I will say. The food cache was the last thing I found. It was wedged in a spruce fork about chest height, 40 yards from the bed. A piece of folded birch bark with what turned out to be dried strips of dark meat, heavily preserved with cold, and a small accumulation of dried high bush cranberries, which accounted for the dark berries Everett had described. Something had placed that food at a height where a man standing upright could reach it without bending. I thought about that height for a long time. I went home and did not speak of it for 12 years. In 1989, Everett came through Whitehorse on his way to a job in Dawson City, driving equipment for a pipeline maintenance outfit, and he stayed 2 nights at my house. He was 34 years old by then, quiet in the particular way he had been quiet since 1977. A quietness that was different from his quietness before. He was not troubled exactly. He was careful. There is a distinction. Margaret made a roast, and we sat at the table the way we used to at our mother's. And after she had gone to bed, Everett and I sat with coffee, and the house was still. I waited. I had learned by then that pressing him accomplished nothing. He looked at the window for a while, and then he looked at the table, and he said, "It wasn't going to hurt me. I knew that by the second night." I did not say anything. He said, "It was warm. Not like a fire, like something that had a lot of warmth in it and wasn't bothered about sharing it." Then he was quiet again, and I could see him deciding something, and what he decided was to stop there. He looked up at me and he said, "You found the place, didn't you?" It wasn't a question. I told him I had, and I told him about Ruger at the Treeline and about the bed and the tracks and the cache. He listened and he nodded once, slowly, the way our father used to nod when something confirmed a thing he'd already worked out in his head. He said, "Don't tell anybody." I said I hadn't, and I wouldn't. He said, "It didn't want anything from me." That's what I couldn't figure out for a long time. It just didn't want me to die out there. Those were the last words he said on the subject. I have been turning them over for 35 years. Now, I want to tell you what I believe happened on that plateau. And I want to be clear that this is my reconstruction from the evidence and from that one broken conversation, and not something Everett ever confirmed in full. I believe that, on the evening of October 11th, 1977, with the ground blizzard blinding the plateau and the temperature dropping, my brother found the northeast drainage by following the fall of the ground, the way most people unconsciously navigate in zero visibility. and he went into the spruce stand looking for wind shelter. I believe he was already in the early stages of cold exposure, his thinking slowing, his hands losing dexterity, and he may not have fully understood what found him in that drawer. I think something large was already in or near that drainage. I think it registered my brother as small and cold and not any kind of threat, and I think it made a decision I am not able to account for in any framework I was handed by my trade or my upbringing. I think it broke spruce boughs and constructed something between a bed and a shelter, and I think it lay down beside him in the dark, and the warmth of its body, a body far larger than a man's, held his core temperature above the threshold that would have killed him. I think it did this not once but across 3 nights. I think it left food it had prepared or cached by its own methods at a height that suited the person who needed it, and I think it stayed close enough across those days that Everett, half conscious some of that time by his own later admission, knew he was not alone and registered that as safety. On the morning of October 24th, I believe it moved back, or went away entirely, and Everett came to himself sufficiently to understand that he was still alive, and that he could walk south toward the road. I cannot tell you what it was. I am not going to use words that other people use for things like this, because most of those words carry freight I cannot verify. I will tell you that the tracks I measured in that drawer were not made by a bear, which would have been in late-season torpor, and would not have behaved in any fashion resembling what I have described. I will tell you they were not moose or caribou tracks. I will tell you that the arrangement of those spruce boughs was not an animal bed in any sense that matches anything I know from 33 years of flying bush country and another 20 years of running trap lines alongside it. Something thought about what a cold man needed. Something acted on that thought. That is as far as I can take it honestly. What I want to talk about before I finish is what this cost, and what it gave, and what it means that I am telling it now. It cost me a certain kind of ease I had before. I had grown up with a working understanding of what the Yukon held, the animals, the weather, the country, the particular brutality of cold that does not hold anything personal against you. It simply does what physics requires. After 1977, I was never again fully comfortable in my certainty about what the country held. That is not entirely a bad thing. A bush pilot who is too comfortable in his certainties does not live long, but there is a difference between professional caution and the specific unease of knowing that the frame you have built to organize the world is missing a room. I flew my routes for 26 more years after Everett walked out. I flew over that plateau on the Carmack's leg 140 or 50 times. I never counted exactly. And every time I looked down at the northeast drainage and the spruce stand, I thought about what was in that drawer, and whether it was still there, and whether it had any idea that a man in a small blue and white Cessna overhead owed it something he could not repay. It gave me my brother back. That is not a small thing, and I want to be precise about it. Everett is 69 years old. He drove equipment for 20 years across the north, retired to a small place outside of Haines Junction, and he has a garden now that he takes seriously, and a truck he maintains with more care than he ever applied to himself in 1977. We talk on the phone on Sundays. He has never brought up the plateau again. I have not brought it up either. We have an agreement that sits between us on the line like a third party who is always present and never speaks. And it is fine. It is more than fine. I sat across a kitchen table from that man for 35 Christmases after they tried to close his file, and the table held a living person. And our mother had been right. Our mother. I need to say something about her before I close. Ruth Jordan died in 2011, at 87 in the Teslin Care Facility in the early days of March when the light was starting to come back. She had kept Everett's place at the table for every family meal from the night of October 21st, 1977, which was the night the file closed, until October 24th, 1977, when he walked out alive. And I believe she kept it in her heart long after there was no longer a physical table to set it at, the way people who are right about important things carry their rightness quietly and without requiring acknowledgement. She never said to Sergeant Pike or to anyone in official capacity that she had been correct. She did not need to say it. The man had walked out of the brush on his own feet and eaten 2 sandwiches in a maintenance crew's truck cab, and that was enough for her. I used to think her refusal to accept the death presumption was a mother's inability to let go. I was wrong about that. She was not refusing to let go out of grief or denial. She was refusing to let go because she knew something about that country that the search protocol did not know, something she could not have articulated in technical terms, but that she held with the certainty of a person who has paid long attention to something larger than herself. She pointed to that drainage on the search map on day 1. I think about that sometimes. I think about whether she had some knowledge, passed down or acquired through years of living close to that country, that the northeast drainage was a place where something watched over what came to it, cold and in need. I cannot verify that. I do not know what she knew. But she pointed to the right place, and she did not stop setting the table, and she was right. The thing I have been sitting with in these last months, with my heart doing what it is doing, and the nights getting long in the particular way nights get long when you are not certain how many more of them you have, is what it means that something out there on that plateau in October of 1977 decided my brother was worth keeping alive. Not because he earned it, not because he was exceptional. He was a 22-year-old kid who ran light on gear and trusted the weather too far and got himself into a situation he could not get himself out of. The country did not owe him anything. Whatever was in that drawer did not owe him anything. It chose to stay beside him anyway, for 3 nights, in the dark and the cold, sharing warmth that it could have withheld without consequence. I have thought about whether I should feel frightened by that. Some people would. Some people, when I have described parts of this without the full detail, have looked at me with an unease that I understand but do not share. I do not feel frightened by it. I feel something closer to the sensation you get on a long solo flight in clear weather, when the country is spread out below you in every direction to the limit of visibility, and the engine is running steady and you understand, not in a frightening way, but in a clarifying way, that you are very small in something very large, and that the something very large is not hostile. It is not indifferent either. It is watching in the way that country watches, and it has its own reasons for the things it does, and a man who tries too hard to explain those reasons to himself is going to miss the thing that matters. What matters is that my brother is alive. What matters is that something in that spruce drawer made a choice in the coldest hours of an October night to be kind. I have no better word for it than that. Ruger is gone now, 30 years gone, buried under the spruce at the back corner of the property in Whitehorse where he liked to sleep in the summer heat. I think about the way he stood at that tree line, calm and still and entirely certain that whatever he was smelling was not a danger. He had better instruments than I did for that kind of assessment, and he was not confused. I trust what he registered there. It is, in a strange way, one of the things I come back to when I need to feel certain that what I have reconstructed is close to true. Ruger did not alarm. In 33 years of flying that country and however many seasons on the trapline, I never once saw him stand that still at a tree line without either lunging toward game or backing from threat. That morning he stood and he was calm, and he looked at the trees, and he looked at me, and his tail made one slow arc, and he was at peace with whatever was in there. I want to be at peace with it too. I think I mostly am. I am telling you this now because the account needed a keeper besides me, and I have decided it should live somewhere beyond the four walls of a house, where an old man is sitting up late with a lamp on and a cup of coffee he keeps forgetting to drink. 47 years is long enough to carry something alone. My brother kept his part. I kept mine. Now the keeping passes, and what you do with it is yours. I am not asking you to believe me. I am asking you to consider the possibility that the country is older than our record of it, and that it holds things we do not have language for, and that some of those things have chosen, for reasons that belong to them and not to us, to be gentle. That is not a small thing. In a world that offers a great deal of evidence for the opposite, a single act of that kind of gentleness, offered to one cold and frightened young man in a spruce drawer on an October night, is worth the keeping. Everett's place was set at that table until he came home. He came home. If you have ever stood at the edge of deep timber in the late afternoon and felt the particular quality of attention that the tree line gives back to you, something beyond the movement of animals or the random noise of wood and wind, something specific and patient and aware, then you already understand what I am not quite able to say. You have felt the country watching. The question I have spent 47 years turning over is not what was out there watching. The question is what it decided in the dark of that October night, when the temperature dropped to the edge of what living things can survive, and a young man who ran too light lay down in a spruce drawer and stopped being able to make good decisions for himself. It decided to stay. That is the whole of it. That is what I needed you to have.